If it's Wednesday, it's four candidates lashing out at each other, 40 points behind the frontrunner with just 40 days to Iowa. It's the fourth presidential debate, the fourth down of the battle for the Republican presidential nomination.
This is a Meet the Press special, live from Washington. Here's Kristen Welker.
Welcome to Meet the Press special coverage of the fourth Republican presidential debate. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. Tonight, four Republican presidential candidates sparred on stage in what could be the final primary debate before voting begins next month. Over the last 2 hours, the action on the stage in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, playing out once again without the field's frontrunner, Donald Trump. The former president has skipped every debate so far while weathering criminal indictments, fraud charges, trials, and pushback against inflammatory campaign rhetoric and threats of political retribution. But with the candidates about to walk off the stage tonight, the reality inside the Republican Party and in these debate halls has been undeniable. Donald Trump is running away with the nomination, and the remaining candidates are running out of time. It was a night of personal insults and animosity, with most of the field's fire directed at each other, not the frontrunner. Instead, the night began with a rapid-fire series of attacks aimed at the rising candidacy of former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
You have other candidates up here like Nikki Haley. She caves anytime the left comes after her, anytime the media comes after her. I just ask you, if you're somebody that's going to be the president of the United States and you can't stand up against child abuse, how are you going to be able to stand up for anything? That is the truth. We have it on.
Nikki, you were bankrupt when you left the UN. After you left the UN, you became a military contractor. You actually started joining service on the board of Boeing, whose back you scratched for a very long time, and then gave foreign multinational speeches like Hillary Clinton is, and now you're a multimillionaire. That math does not add up.
I love all the attention, fellas. Thank you for that.
Well, Haley had the biggest target on her back of the candidates on stage, with some of the most extreme attacks from Vivek Ramaswamy, who Haley dismissed as scum following his personal attacks at the last debate. And tonight, there were more fireworks.
Nikki is corrupt. This is a woman who will send your kids to die so she can buy a bigger house. This is the problem, using identity politics more effectively than Kamala Harris. I'm sick and tired of the double standards. The people of this country are too. Having two X chromosomes does not immunize you from criticism.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Governor Haley, would you like to respond?
No, it's not worth my time to respond to him.
Rare moment where a candidate declined to respond there. Well, those were just a couple of the more wild lines from Ramaswamy, who repeated a number of conspiracy theories on the debate stage. It was also a night of obvious urgency for former New Jersey Governor Christie. He has struggled to gain traction even among primary voters skeptical of the frontrunner. Tonight, he unloaded.
We've had these three acting as if the race is between the four of us. The fifth guy, who doesn't have the guts to show up and stand here, he's the one who, as you just put it, is way ahead in the polls. And yet I've got these three guys who are all seemingly to compete with, Voldemort. He who shall not be named. They don't want to talk about it. The fact is that when you go and you say the truth about somebody who is a dictator, a bully, who has taken shots at everybody, whether they've given him great service or not over time, who dares to disagree with him, then I understand why these three are timid to say anything about it. But the fact of the matter is, the truth needs to be told. I'm in this race because the truth needs to be spoken. He is unfit.
Now, apart from Christie, the other candidates on stage had some policy critiques of former President Trump's time in office, but direct confrontation of his candidacy was pretty rare. Here's Christie's attempt to press Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to answer a question about Trump's fitness for office.
Do you think he's mentally fit to be president?
I think we need to have somebody younger. I think when you get up to 80, I don't think it's a job for that.
Why doesn't he just answer the question? The question was very direct. Is he fit to be president or isn't he? The rest of the speech is interesting, but completely non-responsive. And if we were in a courtroom, they'd strike the answer and say, Governor DeSantis.
No, they
you're
wouldn't. They would say that
you're a smart
they would
man.
argue that
no, they would.
No, they wouldn't.
They would
Chris.
strike the answer
no, they wouldn't.
because you're not answering it.
You just
is he
don't
fit?
like. You
is
have
he
your.
fit?
You have
no.
your thing.
Is he
you
fit
have
or isn't
your
he?
thing.
No, I don't have my thing.
We don't.
He's the thing. Is
we
he
do
fit
not
or
want
isn't
to
he?
do someone
You're talking
that's
about him being 80 years old.
It doesn't mean
Ron,
that somebody
is he
couldn't
fit?
get elected. That's up to the people.
Governor DeSantis, let him finish.
We should not nominate somebody
He won't answer.
who's almost 80 years old.
Okay.
He's afraid to answer.
No, I'm not.
You have to either you're afraid or you're not listening.
No, it's not.
There's a simple question.
Is he fit?
Nobody can hear this. No one can hear you. They can't hear you. You finish, and then you get it back.
All right. Look, I'm a simple guy. Okay? I hear the question, and I answer it. Is he fit or isn't he? I'll concede you're fit, Ron. You're a new generation. Is he fit or isn't he? And this is the problem with my three colleagues. They're afraid to offend.
So big picture, what we saw on stage tonight, the attacks, the deflection, the large-scale ignoring of Donald Trump's candidacy was an apt reflection of the state of this primary. Our NBC News team has every single angle of the Republican primary covered tonight. We've got reporters in the debate spin room and on the campaign trail talking to voters. We'll speak with top campaign officials about how their candidates performed on stage, and we have got the best of the best panel here. So let's get it all started with NBC's Garrett Haake in the spin room. Garrett, what were your biggest takeaways? A lot of fireworks tonight.
There really were, Kristen, but I think there were really two major storylines here. The first is Nikki Haley. If you were to land from Mars in the middle of this debate right now or this race right now and just watch what happened on this debate stage, you would come away with the impression that Nikki Haley has been the dominant frontrunner in this race, the way she was attacked by every other candidate. Now, I do think Haley has proven herself to be a deft debater. She had kind of quippy one-liners and the ability to dismiss a lot of the attacks against her, even when she chose not to engage with Vivek Ramaswamy and his sign towards the end of the debate. But she wasn't as able to talk about her own record and her own plans and policies as she has been in other debates because she was so much put on her back foot over everything from her donors to her policies on transgender students, and the list goes on. But then there was the Chris Christie storyline here. And boy, if Chris Christie just barely qualified for this debate on literally the last day, and what a different debate it would have been had he not been here on the debate stage tonight, because he dragged this debate back to Earth, the actual planet we've been running this campaign on, where Donald Trump is the dominant frontrunner. And Christie is going to have a very difficult time winning this Republican nomination for a myriad of reasons. But what he did on the stage tonight was remind everyone why the other candidates on this stage will also have a different time. Their refusal to grapple with Donald Trump and the hold he has on this party. I think a lot of folks expected to see this version of Chris Christie from the jump in this campaign, but he brought an older version of Chris Christie to the debate stage tonight, really forcing these candidates to engage with reality here. It reminded me of the 2016 debate when he essentially took out Marco Rubio. We saw some of that here from Christie tonight, especially in that exchange with Ron DeSantis.
Garrett, this is why you're so good. Mars versus Earth. It is a really great way to narrow it down. It really is. And it brings us back to the central question. Did anyone have a breakout moment enough to change the dynamics? Of course, you can't answer that there in the spin room tonight. Vivek Ramaswamy sure tried to again and again, but I'm curious for your take, because he has run as the political outsider, the younger version of Trump, if you will. It doesn't seem like his attacks are landing in the same way that they did during the first debate, when actually he got a fair amount of applause. It seemed like he got a fair amount of boos tonight, Garrett.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Republican voters are getting used to the Ramaswamy shtick here. I mean, he's essentially a walking meme on the campaign trail. He certainly does speak to a significant element of the Republican Party. But it seems to me like if he is not your flavor, there's nothing you saw tonight that you haven't seen in another debate that would suddenly turn you on to Ramaswamy.
All right, Garrett Haake, thank you so much for your great analysis and reporting. As always, we really appreciate it. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson watched tonight's debate with a group of voters in Des Moines, Iowa, where we are just, let us remind everyone, 40 days out from the first in the nation's caucuses. Priscilla, thanks so much for being here. So what are the voters saying? What are they telling you? Who won tonight in their perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, Kristen, the countdown to the caucus is on, and we've got a room full of voters to ask that question to. So first, let me just ask, show of hands, did this debate change anything for anybody? No. So people are pretty dug in with their candidates here, and I want to start first with Angela, because this is your first time watching the debate. You are a Trump supporter, and so I want to know, what did you think of what you saw tonight?
I thought there were a lot of fireworks going on. It was interesting to watch the candidates interact, and Trump is still the winner.
Trump is still the winner. Why?
I like the policies. I like my retirement fund, build the border, drill, baby, drill. America's future is very bright under Trump's leadership.
And Angela found herself sitting next to JP, who is a Nikki Haley supporter. I noticed you all having some conversation during the debate. What did you think of Nikki Haley's performance tonight?
I think Nikki is phenomenal for a lot of reasons. I love her international experience. I love her state governorship and the way she just holds herself. I supported Trump in the beginning. I did not vote for him the second time because I know Trump since way prior to the presidency, 2004. And I did not like how he wasn't able to transition. Nikki is a right person on the international stage, and when she had her position at the UN, she was highly respected. And I just think she's the right person during this time with what's going on in the world to lead both on an international and a local level.
And I want to move through the room a little bit this way, Kristen, because I talked to this corner of folks who are also Nikki Haley supporters, and you told me that you think Trump's lead in the polls is not accurate, that Nikki Haley could potentially chip away at some of that. Tell me about that.
I have talked to a lot of former Trump supporters that, like the gentleman just said, it just seems like that his lead is too big to be real. It just seems like an artificial lead.
And all of you have told me you're supporting Nikki Haley, so tell me a little bit about why. Why for you all? Why is she your candidate?
I've liked her probably since the beginning, but it's just grown stronger over the last few months. I've gone and listened to her speak at about 4 different events. I like her experience as governor and what that lends to the presidency so that she can get our economy under control. So her economic experience, and then being the UN ambassador, I think she's great experience for national relations. And I love her passion for her country, for her family, and I just think she would be a fantastic leader. Yeah. That's what we need.
And I want to get you in real quick. What did you think of her debate performance?
This wasn't the best of the 4. I think they attacked her because I think they understand that she is the leading candidate. As far as those 4 go, I think she's the one that has the potential to win the popular vote and bring the House and the Congress to the Republican Party. The others might not.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Kristen, I will leave it there. This is what the voters in Iowa are saying tonight. Kristen?
Priscilla, it's such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much to you and to all of the participants there in Des Moines. Joining me now on set is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. Chuck, great to see you.
Ms. Welker, good to see you.
Thank you for being here. So let's start right where they left off, which is Nikki Haley. She was getting it from all sides tonight, not a surprise. Right. Do you think she gave as good as she got?
Look, this was not her. I mean, I thought I'll let her supporter say it. I'll quote the supporter. I thought the same thing. I thought she's had better nights. Yeah. She was very much under siege. She was, I think the previous debate, she was the aggressor, right? Mm-hmm. She was out there. She had to make room for herself. She had to go get herself into the top tier, right? Mm-hmm. She is top tier now, and it's all been about her over the last couple of weeks. And the money stuff is just tough to respond to, right?
How big of a problem is it for her?
I don't think it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
But it's an embarrassing thing on television, right? You're taking, the Reid Hoffman money. It isn't easy to defend. And you can see she was struggling to say, well, you're just jealous that I'm getting this. Which, by the way, she's right. Like, they're upset about it. But the fact is, it's never a popular thing to be getting donations from billionaires, right? Whether you're in a Democratic primary or a Republican primary. So I do think she had a rough night. But look, part of it is this Vivek Ramaswamy guy. It's pretty clear he's not a serious candidate for president. If you now look at how he's behaved at every debate, it's very tactical, right? He is all about trying to find a way to almost hijack the debate in some form. Tried to do it to the NBC debate, tried to do it at the beginning of this debate, tried to do it at the beginning of the first Fox debate, did it that way. This is what he does. And it's amazing. Perhaps it's coincidental. I have no evidence, but it seems that he is able to hijack and attack the person Trump would like to see fail the most. And he just comes across like Trump's best asset on that stage each and every time. And then when he goes with his loony conspiracy theories, what do? They fit right into what Trump's trying to do. So he's really an impediment, I think, for both DeSantis and Nikki Haley. Like, there's a point here, look, you got to deal with a troll when they run for president. But he's such an impediment at these debates that you cannot break through because of his nonsense.
What's interesting tonight, and I feel like we've witnessed this with each debate, it seems like he gets more and more booze with each debate. Doesn't mean he doesn't get more popular.
Nobody likes the guy. I don't think that matters, right? That's why you're sitting here. His behavior is illogical unless he's doing it on behalf of somebody else. Because it makes, you're absolutely right. He's more unpopular every time. His numbers have been going down, not up. You do wonder at one point, are anybody physically going to attack the guy on stage? And I'm talking about the candidates sometimes. I'm only half kidding on that. But that is what makes it like, what are you doing? Because everything you're doing is pushing people away from you, but you are rattling those opponents of Trump. So it benefits Trump. That's why you used to sit here and you have to ask yourself, is he serious about running for president, or is he just trying to be a Trump surrogate? Right.
Well, and you take me to my next point, which is it led to this fascinating moment of Christie defending Nikki Haley, which no one saw coming. But we're watching and saying, could Christie be looking at potentially endorsing Nikki Haley down? I mean, what did you make of that moment?
I assume that's what's coming.
Okay.
All right. I mean, I look at it, it's like if Christie isn't ready to potentially show that he's willing to support the sanest alternative to Trump, then he's not being honest about his own candidacy, right? What is his candidacy about? He's not. He knows he's not running to win the nomination because he's running a one-state campaign, but he is running to try to weaken Donald Trump. And if Nikki Haley finishes second in Iowa, I assume Christie drops out that night.
Interesting.
Because if he doesn't, then he actually only serves to help Trump because it would actually slow down Nikki Haley. And I do think, assuming this is the scenario that we're starting to see play out, we'll look at this debate. That moment will be seen as, oh, yeah, this is when. And I don't know if this is good for Haley or not, because it may define her too much outside of the Trump wing of the party. And there's only so much room to grow on that wing of the party.
Yeah, it's hard to see how you win the nomination without winning over some of those voters.
Right.
Chuck, let me ask you about Ron DeSantis. This was a really critical night for him because he's trying to gain back some of the momentum that he's been losing. He kind of missed the opportunity or deflected the opportunity to directly go after Trump, not surprisingly, a number of times. There were some critiques in there, but not like what he could have done. Look, he believes his path to victory is winning over Trump supporters. Yeah.
And he's probably right. I will say that. I don't think he's going to get there, but he's probably right. And this has been the trap of running for president, in that Trump's got all these votes. You got to go after Trump to dislodge him from his voters. But how you go after him, look, he's tried different. He can't serve 2 terms. Nobody's paying attention to that. Right. But he's tried that. Oh, he's going to be older than what Joe Biden was. He's trying all these indirect bank shots, and the voter hasn't caught on to it. Ron DeSantis would be in a much better position if Joe Biden were leading Donald Trump by 10 points in the general election polls. Yeah. That's if Ron DeSantis wants to win this primary, he needs to hope Joe Biden's approval rating goes up 10 points overnight before the Iowa caucus.
Because that was his big argument in the beginning. That was his whole reason for getting into the race.
Donald Trump looks electable, which means these 4 don't really have a case.
Yeah, great. Chuck, thank you so much. Kristen. Appreciate it. Great to get all of you.
Late night for me.
Late night.
Come on, us retirees. We don't stay up this late.
Oh, you're
come on, I had dinner at 4 and all that stuff.
Oh, Chuck, you're not going anywhere. You're going to be so busy. Thank you for being here. Coming up, we'll hear directly from the Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley campaigns on what's next for the 2 rivals after an explosive night of attacks. You're watching Meet the Press special coverage of the 4th Republican primary debate. Stay with us.
I want you all to kind of picture in your minds Election Day. You'll all be heading to the polls to vote. And that's something that Donald Trump will not be able to do, because he will be convicted of felonies before then, and his right to vote will be taken away. You know, look.
Welcome back. That was former New Jersey Governor Christie being booed by the conservative primary crowd in a reminder of the former president's popularity and frontrunner status. So the question, can anyone catch him with time running out? Joining me now is DeSantis campaign manager James Uthmeier. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, as I just said, time is running out. Governor DeSantis hoping to break some of the momentum that Nikki Haley has had. We certainly saw a lot of attacks in her direction. Do you think he did what he needed to do tonight to regain that spot as second place to Trump?
Ron DeSantis did exactly what he had to do tonight. He showed up. He's a fighter. We know that, but he's a fighter and he wins. This is yet another debate victory for him. And for him, he wins not just because he's strong and principled. He doesn't waver and give different answers based on what state or audience he's visiting, what day of the week it is. He is principled. He sticks to his guns. And then he has the record of results. He has accomplished everything in Florida he ever said he would do, from school choice to protecting women in the bathroom, protecting children from mutilating surgeries, minors that are going to, suffer from child abuse. He has done everything. He's made Florida the #1 state economy, and he has proven that he's got what it takes to go lead this country and get the job done.
We noticed there were a couple of moments where he declined to directly take aim at the frontrunner, former President Trump. He was critical, but for example, when he was asked if the former president is mentally fit to serve over and over again, he said, we need to find someone younger. We saw a similar approach when he was dealing with the border. Do you think he missed the opportunity to go at the frontrunner more aggressively, as we have seen Christie do?
No, look, I think he answered the question. Some might just not have liked the answer he gave. Does Donald Trump have cognitive function? Yes, he does. But I think the governor was very clear that the country needs a leader who's not going up into the 80s, who's not lost a step. And one thing is clear: Donald Trump is not not the same guy he was 4 or 6 years ago. He has definitely lost a step. The governor said we need a leader who will spit nails, who will fight our enemies, and who will get the job done. A new American leader, a younger person, and he's proven that he can do what needs to be done.
But, James, respectively, I mean, you were just more direct than we heard from the governor tonight on the debate stage. He didn't say what you just said. He said, we need to have somebody younger. I think when you get up to 80, I don't think it's a job for that. He chose his words very carefully. And I guess the question is, just taking a step back, when is he going to take the gloves off? Is it getting too late?
No, look, he has taken the gloves off. He's pointed out the failures of the former president. He's flipped-flopped on many issues. I mean, he recently paraded around a BLM endorsement, the very same BLM that was burning down the streets and cities of our country. So he's changed. He's not the same guy. I think the American public are, they're frustrated that, he did shut much of the country down. He refused to fire Fauci. He refused to fire Christopher Wray. And he was not fiscally responsible. He led to over $7 trillion to the national deficit. So the governor's pointed out policy differences. He doesn't get into the personal attacks, and he's all about going out and talking about his vision for the future. And he was the only candidate on that stage, the only strong conservative that pointed out both the vision but also backed it up with all of his many accomplishments in Florida. Everything he has ever promised he would do, he did, and then some. No other candidate could do that, especially Nikki Haley, who essentially fell off the stage tonight. It was a very bad night for her. Her inaction in South Carolina is what was highlighted, where Governor DeSantis stepped in and made it illegal for China to purchase land in Florida. Nikki Haley gave away half of her state. She's even caught on tape saying she worked for China. When it came to protecting kids against mutilating transgender surgeries, Ron DeSantis made that unlawful. Nikki Haley, no, she says government needs to stay out of the way.
Well, she's, of course, rejected all of those characterizations you've just laid out, that she worked for China and everything else. But let me ask you, big
it's
picture.
All on
let me ask you about. Let me ask you about Iowa.
TheRealNikki.com, it's there.
Let me ask you about Iowa, because obviously Governor DeSantis has gotten the endorsement of Governor Kim Reynolds, as well as evangelical leader Bob Vander Plaats. But if he does not come in second place, can he continue in this race, or does he need to seriously consider dropping out?
Ron DeSantis is going to win Iowa. He's got the endorsement of Kim Reynolds, which is not just a stamp of approval. She's going around the state explaining to everybody why he is the best man for the job. She's very well liked. She has a lot of credibility with the caucus goers, and we're seeing a lot of success there. Ron DeSantis has over 42 legislative endorsements. He's got the grassroots support, more than twice any other candidate in the race. Over 100 faith leaders cheering his campaign in the state. He has 99 county chairs and just completed a visit to every single one of the 99 counties. His rooms are packed for his speeches. He has over 30,000 signed caucus commit cards. The energy in that state is strong. We're going to spend a lot of time there, and he is going to win that state.
All right, James Uthmeier, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. I know it's a late night there. And joining me now is my panel for tonight, Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, Hugh Hewitt, host of The Hugh Hewitt Show, and Matt Gorman, Republican strategist and former senior advisor to Senator Tim Scott's presidential campaign. Thanks so much to all of you for staying up late with us. Really appreciate it. Amy, let me start with you. Your reaction to what we just heard from the DeSantis campaign, and I put the same question to you that I put to James. Did Governor DeSantis do anything to blunt Nikki Haley's momentum tonight? There certainly were a lot of attacks in her direction.
There were, and I think that DeSantis, especially in the second half of the debate, did seem more stable. He seemed stronger, more directed than we have seen him in previous debates. So that was probably, that second half of the debate was probably the best he has been thus far. And at the same time, I don't think he derailed her. If we think back to other debates where a candidate who looked like they were surging and then got attacked and it took them out of the game, this was not that, like the Rubio and Christie situation, or Bloomberg getting eviscerated by Elizabeth Warren in 2020 on the debate stage. So did he get himself into a better place, maybe stopping a slide or the constant stories about how challenging his campaign has been? Maybe, but I don't know that it's enough to take Nikki Haley out of the game.
And by the way, that's just step one. The second step to that, Hugh, would be catching up to Nikki Haley and overtaking Trump. And it doesn't seem like any of the candidates did that tonight. But Nikki Haley, I mean, she was just attacked from all sides. It's not a surprise, but how do you think she handled it?
Well, I thought she handled it very well, and she clearly got all the arrows, so she clearly has got all the momentum. I think Chris Christie is at peak Chris Christie right now, and that peak Chris Christie, if you're going to sell, sell now. So before New Hampshire, I expect the former governor to endorse the former ambassador. And the key thing here is, did Governor DeSantis alienate Nikki Haley voters? Because if he does win Iowa and does want to get those Haley voters after the fact, did they come to him, or are they mad at him after? Because there are really only two people left in this race for second place, DeSantis and Haley. And which one of those comes out of New Hampshire after tonight? I would guess it's Nikki Haley. I could be wrong. It could go either way because he's well ahead in Iowa, but I thought she held her ground. The person who lost, I think we'll all agree on the person who lost. Best line of the night goes to Ambassador Haley. I don't need to answer that. I'm not going to waste my time.
I don't think we've ever heard that on a debate stage tonight.
Pass.
I don't need to respond. Matt Gorman, what do you think? What was your take? And did Nikki Haley do what she needed to do to deflect all of the incoming that was coming her way?
To an extent. What I was very focused on tonight was she going to be dismissive of most attacks? Was she going to try and rebut a lot of the attacks? She did a very good job in past debates. If you all remember, she was extremely good at wielding the Oppo book and cutting people down if they tried to go after her. DeSantis had some very effective moments with her tonight, particularly on the transgender issue, but also China. He scored some points with that. And I think to Amy's point, as the debate went on, he got more comfortable. But also, I think as these have been going on, he's been getting better at. He's been showing improvement. Now, look, I think to your point also, Amy, he's steadied himself. Most of the income he's gotten is from his own super PAC in terms of negative stories. So I think he's steadied that. In terms of Nikki Haley, we're talking about 5 to 7 points of change. Maybe it does a little bit. I don't think a ton.
Yeah, that's such a good point, too, that so much of the challenge for Ron DeSantis is coming from inside the House, right? It is the super PAC that was built up to support him is collapsing, and all of the drama around that is weighing the campaign
could
down.
be a big harbinger of things to come. I want to pause the conversation momentarily because I want to get to Olivia Perez-Cubas, a spokesperson for the Nikki Haley campaign. Thank you so much for joining us, for staying up late with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So I don't know if you can hear our conversation here, Olivia, but we are talking about the fact that Ambassador Haley got a lot of incoming tonight. She was getting it from all of the other candidates. She clearly came prepared for that. Are you confident that she is leaving this debate tonight having defended every attack that came her way?
Absolutely. And look, I think anyone who's been paying attention to this race for the past several weeks will not be surprised by the fact that every single person on that debate stage went after Nikki and attacked her, and it is for one reason and one reason alone, and it is because she is winning. Nikki Haley is a threat to all of them. She is the only candidate on that debate stage who is on the rise, who has any sort of momentum. She is now in second place in all 3 early states, second place in Iowa, second place in New Hampshire, and second place in South Carolina. This race is consolidating. It is consolidating very quickly, and Nikki is benefiting from that consolidation. So we're going to head into Iowa in these next few weeks. She's in a strong position, and on the other hand, you've got Ron DeSantis, who has literally spent over $100 million in Iowa. He has put all of his eggs in the Iowa basket, and at this point, he's got absolutely nothing to show for it except a drop in the polls. His polls are half of what they used to be, and Nikki's in second place. So we're excited. We're building off of the momentum, and we feel good.
We did talk to one of her supporters tonight who said he felt of all of the debates, this wasn't necessarily her strongest, that she seemed to lose some momentum in the second half. How do you respond to her supporters who may be a little bit concerned after tonight?
Not at all. I totally disagree. I mean, the arrows were after her. She defended herself. She defended her record. I think you have to remember 3 months ago, Nikki was underestimated. She's been criticized. She's been attacked for her name, her gender, her religion, you name it. She has been belittled. And now here she is in second place and a threat to all the fellas on the stage. So I would say watch out, because you're going to see more of her.
One of the attacks that we saw her taking from Governor DeSantis was about the donations that she has been getting. She defended that. She said, you're just jealous you're not getting these big dollar donations. But is there any concern that that might not resonate with the Republican base, with the caucus goers in Iowa, the voters in New Hampshire who she needs to win over?
Look, I will channel Nikki. I think she said it best. He's attacking her because he's jealous. Be very clear that he sought all of those donors. They were once his donors, and they left him because his campaign is flailing. I'll also point out that Nikki just won the backing of the largest conservative grassroots apparatus in this country, AFP. She won this endorsement because she is the strongest candidate to beat both Trump and Biden. She won that endorsement because she is a tried and true conservative. She has a solid economic plan. This organization wants to expand freedom, limit government. That's the kind of conservative that Nikki is, and that's the kind of president that voters are going to get.
Is it fair to say she will likely be in the race through South Carolina, but is South Carolina make or break for Ambassador Haley?
She is going to do as well as she can in Iowa. She's now in second place. The field will consolidate after Iowa. She goes into New Hampshire, where she is now in a solid second in double digits. She's going to do as well as she can in New Hampshire. The field will consolidate. So we feel pretty confident that come South Carolina, it's going to be a head-to-head between her and Donald Trump. As you know, she enters South Carolina, her home state. Voters know her. They love her. They have taken a chance on her before, not once, but twice, and we feel good about it.
All right, Olivia Perez-Cubas, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
having me.
And coming up, a campaign surrogate for the Ramaswamy campaign joins me after another fiery night with his rivals. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press special coverage of the 4th Republican primary debate.
We're marching towards fascism under Biden. Jack Smith has subpoenaed every last retweet that someone has issued from Donald Trump in the year 2020. The only person more fascist than the Biden regime now is Nikki Haley, who thinks the government should identify every one of those individuals with an ID. That is not freedom, that is fascism, and she should come nowhere near the levers of power, let alone the White House.
Welcome back. That was Vivek Ramaswamy showcasing some of the candidates' highly aggressive comments tonight. That was him accusing Nikki Haley of acting like a fascist. He also suggested the January 6th attack was an inside job, that the government lied about 9/11, that the 2020 election was stolen, and that the Great Replacement conspiracy theory was government policy. All debunked conspiracy theories. Joining me now is Tricia McLaughlin, senior advisor to the Ramaswamy campaign. Thank you for joining me, Tricia. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen, for having me.
So let's start right there. Are you comfortable with your candidate peddling in these conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement theory, which has been a rallying cry for white nationalists and also some violent extremists?
Kristen, I completely disagree with the premise of your question. You're calling them conspiracy theories, and most of these are conspiracy, actually, realities. I mean, you're taking 9/11, for example. Vivek said the government lied to us for 20 years about 9/11. That is absolutely true. There was Saudi Arabian involvement, which the 9/11 Commission denied for 20 years, until actually recent months where they offered evidence that Saudi Arabian intelligence was involved. Then we're moving on to January 6th, Kristen. I'm sure you've seen some of the 44th.
The list of theories that he laid out, though, have been debunked. But let me move on to the fact that he yet again was throwing
was not debunked, and neither was the January 6th. So I don't know why you're saying they've been debunked.
The January 6th being an inside job, that's been debunked.
As there's been 44,000
There's no
hours of
evidence
footage
of
that is
that.
slowly being released.
That's right.
They are absolutely starting to show evidence that people were welcomed in by police officers. So I think there's absolutely questions about what happened on January 6th. And I think that you, as a responsible journalist, you know that we should question what the government has told us.
Some people have cherry-picked pieces of that footage that has been released to try to make that case, but there's no evidence that it's an inside job. But let me move to the broader. Let me move on to my question, Tricia. Let me move on to my question because the audience reaction tonight was notable in that you heard from the candidate, and then on multiple different instances, his comments, his attacks were followed up by a series of boos. Are you concerned? Is he concerned that he's failing to resonate with the voters who he needs?
Kristen, who do you think built that audience tonight? The RNC, who's helping run these debates. Who did Vivek call on last debate to resign? Ronna McDaniel, who then has been booing Vivek and saying she wouldn't give 1 cent of RNC funding to Vivek. Yes, I'm not surprised that they would stack with establishment Republicans. I mean, of course they did.
Well, but the polls also bear that out as well, that he's not resonating right now. And he's, not within striking distance of Haley or Trump, for that matter, who he needs to defeat. Is it his goal to defeat Trump? Because on that stage, and when he goes out onto the debate stage, it often seems like he is defending the former president. Is he running for office, or is he running to be a surrogate of former President Trump's?
Kristen, I think you and the media are for a big surprise come January 15th. What we're seeing in Iowa is bigger and bigger crowds than the visits we've had before. And what we're finding is that more than 50% of those who come to Vivek's events are not registered Republicans. Only 20% are typical Republican caucus voters. So Vivek is tapping into disaffected Democrats, political independents, all of those people we need to educate how to caucus and bring them around with us. I think that those people are not being polled.
Tricia, if he doesn't win in Iowa, is that game over for Mr. Ramaswamy?
I don't think so at all. I think if we perform well in Iowa, that's going to bring us huge momentum. But look at New Hampshire. New Hampshire is largely an independent state. And I mean, what is it? 40% are registered independents. Vivek polls incredibly well with independents. That's where we're seeing a lot of people from events. We see people in Ron Paul hats, Ron Paul shirts. These are people we're going to bring with us when Vivek actually sweeps.
All right, Tricia McLaughlin, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Coming up next, you're looking live at a watch party in Atlanta where battleground voters are reacting to what they heard on the stage tonight. We'll take you there after the break. You're watching Meet the Press special coverage of the 4th Republican primary debate. Back with me now is the panel, Amy Walter, Hugh Hewitt, and Matt Gorman. So, guys, let's talk about some of the fireworks tonight. We were just talking to the Ramaswamy campaign, and there were a number of moments when he was attacked, frankly, by other candidates, including Christie, who was defending Nikki Haley. Let's play that sound, and I'm going to get everyone's reaction on the other side.
We're now 25 minutes into this debate, and he has insulted Nikki Haley's basic intelligence, not her positions, her basic intelligence. She doesn't know regions. She wouldn't be able to find something on a map that his 3-year-old could find. Look, if you want to disagree on issues, that's fine. And Nikki and I disagree on some issues. But I'll tell you this, I've known her for 12 years, which is longer than he's even started to vote in a Republican primary. And while we disagree about some issues and we disagree about who should be president of the United States, what we don't disagree on is this is a smart, accomplished woman, and you should stop insulting her.
Hugh, a lot of people weren't expecting Christie to defend Nikki Haley, but there he was. And as we said earlier, raises questions about whether he might be thinking about endorsing her if he does drop out at some point. But this tension with Vivek Ramaswamy, the first debate, he actually got a lot of applause for his attack lines. It seems like it's wearing thin with the audience.
I think it's over. Now, I do want to compliment the governor on a gentlemanly moment. And I think there still is a place, especially among older voters who tend to go out to caucuses in the middle of the night and who vote in New Hampshire. And I think they will honor the fact that he was a gentleman and came to the defense of the ambassador. But I also think that generally the debates have run their course until after New Hampshire, because we've heard everything. I mean, you and I did this before. Yes. I didn't hear anything new tonight, because I don't think, I think the moderators did a fine job.
Yes,
don't get me wrong.
They did.
But I don't think I heard anything I hadn't heard before.
Matt, what do you think? What's your take?
With the Vivek thing, there's always one candidate who you can just tell the other candidates cannot stand on the stage. You can always tell. And you could tell from debate 1 it was Vivek. And I think it boiled over certainly tonight. You had that Christie moment, which I think a lot of us have been waiting for. When is he going to have that moment that really breaks through? He'd been talking a big game for a long time. But I agree with you, Hugh. I think there will be debates. There'll be kind of offshoot debates where it might be a Fox show or this or that with among 1 or 2 candidates. But I think for the most part, for right now, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the last major organized debate for a little bit.
Interesting. Amy, Vivek is so interesting because, and I put this question to his campaign surrogate, which is he running to beat Trump? Is he really running to be president? Or is he running to get Trump's attention and to potentially be a part of a Trump administration if there is a second Trump term?
Your second point about really getting Trump's attention is the more valid. And to be the next generation's Trump as we talk about going into 2028. None of those tend to work out, though. All those folks who say, well, I'm running now to get attention, and then I'll put myself on the stage for 2028. You know what? 2028 is a long time from now, and there are going to be a whole lot of other people to fill that vacuum. The other thing would be he runs for office somewhere else. He runs for the Senate. He runs for Congress. I don't know if there's obviously not a Senate race right now in Ohio where he's living, but would he be, he's got name ID, but is that what he wants to do? I don't get the sense, because he thinks he should be president at whatever.
I'm from Ohio. That's not a Buckeye approach that he did. It's not a Midwestern Jerry Ford.
But he starts, it's hard getting name ID.
It's also hard when you have all this attention, all these national hits, to go and be.
I know, to be like, I'm going to be
yes.
a House candidate.
Yes.
All right. Well, we will watch and wait and see what happens with his campaign. I do want to pause this conversation because we've spent the last hour breaking down tonight's debate. But on Election Day, it's not our opinion that matters. Of course, it is the voters. NBC News 2024 campaign embed Nnamdi Egwuonwu is with Republican voters at a watch party in Atlanta, Georgia. Nnamdi, it's so good to see you. You do fantastic work, and I know you've been there with the voters in Georgia. What are they telling you? What did they think of tonight's debate?
Well, Kristen, getting a reaction from voters here in Atlanta was quite easy. They actually organized a straw poll on their own during the debate, and were keeping track of their opinions. And by the end of the night, you had Vivek Ramaswamy at this watch party of about 30 people getting 5 votes. You had Ron DeSantis getting 2, both Nikki Haley and Christie having a sole 1 vote. And get this, former President Donald Trump, despite not being on the stage, got 18. So that's really reflective of the vibe of the night here in Atlanta. But you don't have to take my word for it. A couple attendees agreed to stay after and give us their opinions. And Will, I want to start with you. There was a moment tonight that got a lot of people riled up. What was the moment that caught your eye, that left a mark on you?
What left a mark for me was Nikki Haley being called out for being the warmonger that she is. At the same time, Ramaswamy holding up a notepad saying Nikki is corrupt, and that's something that stands out really strongly in my mind and in the voters' mind. But they talk too much about Trump, a man that wasn't on the stage, but ruled the stage tonight.
Yeah. And Kristen, I have to tell you, when Vivek held up his props, there were audible cheers in the room, so it definitely got a lot of people's attention. I heard boos once, and it was when Christie was speaking, and we have our lone soldier of the night who was supportive of Christie. How do you think he did tonight?
Well, Christie is a proven leader, right? He's got a record that he can run on. And to me, he represents like the Republican pragmatist, right? People that understand essentially that we have a situation where we have not won and we haven't had that consistency. But if you attack Trump currently, because of the number of people that are supporting him, it really makes it hard for him to climb the polls. But I thought he did well. He landed some really pragmatic approach, things that talk about rational things that people care about. But unfortunately, he did also call out Donald Trump. And as long as he does that, like the gentleman said, he's still leading.
And Peter, I want to go to you because one thing that surprised me was we saw Vivek Ramaswamy get more support tonight than Ron DeSantis. And I'm curious, as someone who supports him, why do you think that is?
Vivek is passionate, he's clever, he's young, and that's what a lot of voters, I think, are seeing. A lot of folks in this room. DeSantis has military experience, great governing experience, understands state economics. I think when people get to understand the rational and the rationale behind this campaign, they'll do much better.
And Marcy, we don't have too much time left, but the majority of the people in this room supported Donald Trump, who wasn't even on the stage. Why?
Because the people are passionate about President Trump. And he didn't need to be on the stage tonight because the 4 people that were on the stage were jockeying for the second place position, maybe the VP slot or a cabinet position overall.
All right, and I have to tell you, Kristen, that is a theme we heard over and over again throughout the night, that Donald Trump, despite not being on the stage, left the biggest mark. And, you know, that's a story we're hearing again and again throughout this race.
Nnamdi, fantastic job. And I think your watch party gets extra credit for having a straw poll. You're taking this to a whole new level. So thank you. That was fantastic. Fantastic interviews. Looks like they're there for the long haul. So enjoy those conversations, Nnamdi. Thank you so much. Amy, it's so fascinating. It's unofficial. It's not a real poll, but Trump gets 18 votes.
That's
it
right.
says everything.
That's right. That these debates haven't really done anything to move the ball, to move any of these candidates closer to where they want to get to. What's been really fascinating to watch, though, is the different theories of the case that each one of these candidates has put forward, trying to win those voters away from Donald Trump. The Christie, let's just punch Trump in the face. That's obviously getting him, 2%, all right, and maybe getting him some traction in New Hampshire, but not much more than that. There's the Ron DeSantis. He hasn't finished the job. He hasn't gone far enough on some of these issues, especially when we're talking about transgender or the doing stuff with the wall. That hasn't really gotten much traction. And now we have the latest person to kind of bump up in the consciousness here of voters, Nikki Haley, who's doing the sort of gold watch strategy that many had thought that Ron DeSantis was going to do, which is to say, you know what, you've done a good job on most things as President Donald Trump, but we need a new generation. And also threading this needle of, I'm not going to criticize him that loudly, but kind of give some hints about it by talking about the chaos and the generational difference. So hoping that the more subtle approach will win those voters over. But essentially, voters have already, one pollster, Republican pollster said it best to me. She said, you know, think about the voters who are open to voting for somebody else. They're like folks sitting at a dinner, looking at a menu, and they say they're open to different things on that menu, but they know what they really want.
Analogy.
And Donald Trump is what they want.
Yeah.
And these other candidates have to really get them to look at the menu one more time. But don't you like the crab cakes? Come on, they're really good here. What about crab cakes? Nope, we like the steak because that's what's great here.
Well, it's such a great way to frame it. Matt, you know, to that point and to choosing your words carefully, I mean, Trump's recent comments saying, I won't be a dictator except for on day one, did come up during the debate, which was fascinating. The question went to Christie. Certainly the other candidates could have engaged. They chose not to.
Yeah, it's true. And the other argument you didn't hear, to continue that point real quick, is you didn't hear electability argument.
Right.
They concede. I think everyone concedes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The patterns now have changed with the polling. You can't make that argument anymore, so you have to evolve a little bit on that. But I think also to your point, you did not want to... The one thing they didn't want to do was the second part of his statement was talking about the border and talking about energy. So what they didn't want to do was drift in to critiquing him on that policy, which every part of the Republican base follows him on that. So they might not have agreed with the first part, but the second part was where they ran into danger getting a foul of the base on.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, Hugh, you heard Governor DeSantis, and Governor DeSantis has tried to make the case he's going to be even tougher on the border than Trump. And yet he still doesn't give some specifics in some key areas. Tonight, he declined to answer directly what should happen to people who cross. And
I'm going to use a hackneyed football analogy.
Please.
Sometimes you just hang around in a game and hope that something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And so right now we've got Governor DeSantis and Ambassador Haley hanging around in the game, trying to stay within 3 scores. It might be the fourth quarter. They might have to pull a miracle. They might have to hit the Hail Mary, but they're hanging around. And those two hung around through tonight. I don't think Governor Christie and Vivek Ramaswamy did. And if they can't get some break, some series of break, the former president is a prohibitive favorite for the nomination and a prohibitive favorite at this point, I think, to beat Joe Biden. And that's where we are.
All right, well, we will have to see what happens. We are just 40 days from Iowa, folks, so it is really getting exciting. Thank you so much. Fantastic conversation, Amy, Hugh, and Matt. Appreciate it. And thank you all for being with us. We'll have more news and analysis tomorrow and every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern on Meet the Press Now. Have a good evening.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.